Hello quilting friends. Well, today I want to show you how to do the square in a square block. This is a block I use most often within a larger block, so I have come up with a way. Actually, it's not my way, but the way I like to do it is an easy corner square method. So I start with this block, the large block. In this case, I want my finish size to be 4 inches, so I have cut my large block 4.5 inches to add the seam allowance in. And then I have these corner squares that will go in place in the corners naturally. These are cut to figure it out. These, I'll show you my little cheat sheet so you can see what I'm talking about. These, I take the finished size of my large block, which is 4 inches. I divide that in half to come up with 2 inches, and then again I need to add a 1/2 inch for seam allowance, so these squares were cut 2.5 inches. And then I have drawn a line, diagonal line on the back of each one of them using a mechanical pencil. With these, because of how they're going to be attached, I really don't want the line to show through, so I'm not going to use a pen where I might have it show through onto the other side. So with the pencil I've drawn my line, and next we'll start sewing them together. Now I have things lined up here ready to start sewing, and what I want to point out to you is that you'll notice my needle is right next to the line on the outside of the block. I'm not going to sew on top of that line. And I'll show you why in a moment, but what I'm going to aim for is to shoot just to this side of the line that I have drawn. And then I'm going to sew right off the edge there and finish with my little scrap of fabric. Get my tongue to work. Okay, and then what I like to do on these is take a moment and flip over this triangle here and kind of get a sense of whether or not it's covering up the block, in this case the green fabric, that's underneath, and it looks like it's going to do a good job of that. So I'll show you what to do next here. The first thing I want to do with this now is I've laid my ruler so that my 1/4 inch line is on that stitching line, and then trimmed away just the top white triangle. And now I'll be able to press it, but I can once again show you that when it gets pressed, it is going to cover up the green triangle underneath. Sometimes what can happen is you can end up with some of the green square underneath. Sometimes you can end up with some of that square showing through. We don't always stitch straight, or also what happens is when we stitch on that line, we lose some of the fabric that would cover up that square underneath. So in that case, I have my square there still to use as a base, and I'll show you with this a little smaller sample I made here. So this one, when I cut it away, you can see that I have my square underneath is showing through. This one I stitched on the line to show you that, you know, just moving the needle that little bit, I lost that much of my triangle that I needed to cover up the square. So that's why it's so important to sew next to that line as you're going. Now the nice thing about this little method is that if this happens, rather than taking it apart, recutting, resewing, and all of that, I still have the original size block I need. So when I go to put it into the quilt, I'm just going to leave that square underneath there, and you know, I'll still have my, I'll show you the 1/4 inch seam here. I still have enough of it I'm going to catch in my 1/4 inch seam that it's not an issue that it didn't make it to the side. But if I were to trim off, you know, if I had trimmed off this little part, then suddenly my square is not the size I need it to be. So when I go to put it into my quilt, it will be the wrong size and things just won't work out nicely. So that's a nice little trick with doing the square and the square this way. So now that I have my triangle pressed over, I can once again see that my green square is not showing. Now, one of the issues that you'll often have, which is not a problem, is you notice when I flip it over, now I have my white triangle is showing through, which means it's extending further than the size that I need. So what I will do next is take my ruler, line up my, I'm not doing it on my mat here, so let's see if I can see what I'm doing here as I'm looking. I'll line up my 4.5 inch finished size, and then just trim off the white part that I need. And then I will also, since I don't need this anymore and it can be bulky, I know everything is good, I can trim off this green triangle underneath and be rid of that and be ready to go. Okay, now I've placed my next square on the opposite corner, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing I did before, remembering to move my needle over so it's right next to that line, and I'll sew it down. And I've added my last block here, and I'm finishing stitching it in place. Should say my last square. Alrighty, so I've sewn on my last square and pressed it in place, and I just want to show you on the back that I have trimmed away. I haven't trimmed this one away yet, I will, but I just wanted to show you what it looks like. If you do leave it in place, if you need that square, it's not a problem to leave it in place. So go back again, and I'll trim that. And now I have my 4.5 inch perfectly square in a square. So I hope this helps you in your process of making your quilts, and until next time, happy quilting!